When I moved from Utah to Texas, my son Palani was just finishing up 8th grade. He was still a little bit shorter than me back then. Those of you that don't know him are laughing because, or the reason people are laughing is because he's now about 6'5", and it's hard for me to imagine what it was like when he was actually shorter than me, but he was at one point. But I'll never forget the difficulty of that move because I was moving to Dallas, Texas, and his mom was moving to Seattle a few months later, and I was used to seeing him every single weekend. Now, we had separated and divorced a few years before that, and so I, at the time, was a consultant to churches and nonprofit religious organizations, so my typical schedule was to get on an airplane either late Sunday afternoon or else Monday morning, and I would typically go to 2 or 3 different states and help churches and religious nonprofits with fundraising and stewardship development and planning for their future, and so every Friday, I would fly home, and I always looked forward to spending time with Palani. And pretty much every weekend, that's what happened. However, when I moved to Texas, I realized that I was only going to see him about once a month. In fact, my commitment to him was, if I move to Texas to take this job, I will make sure to fly you down to see me at least once a month. And it was typically for a long weekend or for if there was a week-long vacation or an extra few days during the week for days off of school. That's when Palani would come down. And he also spent about half the summer with me and half of Christmas break. Well, I'll tell you, it didn't occur to me at the time how excited that I would be getting every time he would come, and how much preparation would take place. I would start thinking about, well, what would be something really enjoyable to do with Palani when he's here this time? What are some things I need to get and put in the refrigerator and the cupboards that he's really going to enjoy? What are some things I can do ahead of time at work so that I can take a little extra time off when he's here? And how can I arrange my whole schedule, including my days off and my vacations, according to his coming to visit me? Well, it seems like every time Palani came, that was my pattern. How will I prepare for his coming? And it occurred to me as I was getting ready for Advent this year that that's what we do every year in December. We prepare for the coming of Christ once again. And every time Christ comes to us, there's something different, and typically some kind of surprises. Mother Teresa, when she was alive, would tell us that she would see Christ coming in the disguise of the stranger, and in particularly the people on the margins and the sick and dying people of Calcutta, India. And it reminded me that Christ indeed comes to us in so many ways, because one of the most important ways that Christ does come to us is through other people, and sometimes through people that we may not care about very much, as well as those in our family that come to us on a regular basis. So as I was contemplating this, it occurred to me that there are some things that we do every year at Christmas time for this big coming at Christmas, but also it occurred to me that Jesus comes to us not just on Christmas, but Jesus is coming to us right now in a new way today, and will come to us in maybe a different way tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And I think we miss the boat if we only prepare for Jesus coming once a year. Maybe some of us do that. I'm sure we can all think of people who prepare for Jesus coming at Christmas every year and then kind of forget about it for the rest of the year. Well, one of the ways that has helped me prepare for Jesus coming this year and today is this book that I just finished reading. I started it when I was attending the Parliament of the World's Religions in Toronto in early November, but it's a book by Richard Rohr, one of my favorite Christian authors, called The Divine Dance, The Trinity and Your Transformation. And in the introduction, he talks about this picture that's on the cover of the front, and on the back, and on the inside of the book, and on the inside of the back part of the book, just in case you're thinking that this picture may not be important to him. And then, just the other day, I was looking, and I realized you have to look really carefully, but part of the picture is on the black flap right here as well. And it just kind of depends on how the light's hitting it, whether you can see it or not. But I think what Richard Rohr is trying to do with this same image over and over and over again, saying this is really important in understanding the Trinity. And since Jesus is a part of the Trinity, and we talk about God and Jesus and the Spirit every year at Advent, I thought it would be good for me to read up a little bit. And so if you'll pull out now the bulletin insert from Andrei Rublev, The Holy Trinity, Richard Rohr talks about this in his book, and he points out that these three persons of the Trinity are sitting around a table, and the Creator, also known as the Father, is wearing a gold cloak. And gold represents that which endures. It represents status. It represents someone who's importance. And then in the middle is Jesus wearing a blue cloak, and blue represents humanity and the earth. And Richard Rohr reminds us that when we look up to the sky, we see blue. We look at the ocean, we see blue. And blue just happens to reflect the fact that Jesus is a part of this earth. As we read this morning, the Word became flesh and lived among us from the Gospel of John. And then if you look over to the right, there's the Spirit wearing the cloak of green, representing life everywhere. And indeed, the Spirit is among us and everywhere we go. So I looked at that as Richard Rohr was talking about this in the introduction of the book, and I thought, well, that's very nice. And he pointed out a few other things, like there's a common cup at the table. And he also pointed out that Jesus has two fingers, the figure in the middle, representing both his divinity and his humanity. This painting was done about 600 years ago in Russia by a Russian Orthodox Christian artist by the name of Andrei Rublev. And as I looked at this picture, it occurred to me that this is very different from most of the paintings or pictures I've seen of the Trinity in my lifetime. And as I started reflecting upon trips that I've taken to Rome, to the Vatican, different museums, different art books that I've looked at, and just the different images that I have seen in theological books, for example, it's typically not like this at all. There's usually a very old man with a long white beard, very masculine looking as God the Father. And then there's a much younger man, also very masculine looking with a long beard, typically brown or sometimes even blonde. And then the Spirit, the author just has fun with. Often it's a dove or a symbol, or if it's a person, it's typically a man. One of the things that I learned in seminary was that not everyone identifies with God as a man. And at first that was puzzling to me because I grew up in a church where we always talked about God as He. And whenever we talked about the Trinity, it was always Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And all three persons their pronouns were He, Him, and His. And when I got to seminary, there were professors and students saying, we don't have a problem with referring to God as Father, or Christ necessarily as a He, because He was. But when we only think of God in masculine terms, that leaves out about half of humanity. And it occurred to me as I was looking at this picture, you can't really tell if these are three men or three women. And, this is a little blurry, so if you want to look at the book afterwards, you can see it. Or you can actually go online and just Google the Trinity, Andrei Rublev, and this will pop up, and you can look at it in many different formats. And people have kind of upgraded, modernized this picture over the centuries. But where was I going with the masculine, feminine? Oh, so in Christian theology, God has often been thought of as masculine and feminine, all embracing of humanity. And we know that from Genesis, which we read from today in our Old Testament lesson, that God created humankind in God's image. Male and female, God created them. And so often when I've been the pastor of a church, I've given people the opportunity when we refer to the Trinity of saying regarding the first person of the Trinity, you can say Father if you like, you can say Creator, you can say Mother. They're all basically metaphors of God who is the provider and the creator. I remember one student in particular, back when I was in seminary some 30 plus years ago, she said, I did not have a good relationship with my father. I know many people whose fathers were abusive, and to only think of God in that term gives us a false idea of what God is really like for all of us. And so I realized way back then that people have all sorts of images of God, and the Bible itself has many, many images of God, and some are masculine and some are feminine. And some you can't really tell at all, like right here. Well, as I was looking at this image, I thought of all the years I went to Sunday school as a kid and Bible study as a teenager and all the sermons I listened to growing up, and even in college where I took theology and philosophy, and even getting my master's degree in seminary, I realized that pretty much all of the images that I've had of the Trinity were very different from this. They were typically that old man with a white beard, the young man with a long brown or blonde beard, and a dove. And as I looked at this, I felt drawn to this image because as I look at these faces, they are faces of humility, and you get the sense that they're all on equal footing. And the idea here is that there is love and vulnerability and intimacy. And that really is an image of the Trinity that I can hold on to that makes a lot of sense to me. Well, as I was reading Richard Rohr's book about this picture, something caught me totally by surprise. I had known most of this other stuff already, but he pointed out the little rectangle in the table right below the cup. And art historians know that in that little rectangle, there's glue. Remnants of glue that used to hold something there at some point, and many of the art historians believe that there was a mirror there. And so when people would look into this circle of the three persons of the Trinity, they could also see themselves as being there. And I thought, wow, what an incredible image. And I thought, okay, 600 years ago, imagine people looking at this divine relationship. And one of the things I realized as I was doing my sermon preparation this week was, I kind of think of God as being this threesome that's up over here or up there, and I'm kind of removed from it all. And, there's this hierarchy that's kind of almost untouchable, but this beautiful picture paints this circle of divinity, and I'm a part of it. God invites me. And again, I remind you of the passage that Edie read to us at the very beginning of today's service. So God said, let us create humankind in our image. And in the image of God, God created them. God invites us to be a part of this loving relationship. So the other thing that occurred to me in terms of relationship, for most of my theological education, every time Trinity came up that I can remember, we talked about substance. We talked about how the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit were all of the same substance. And in the 4th century, get this, 300 years after Jesus, church leaders came together and said, let's agree on what we believe is the substance of God. So before that, there were all sorts of things people believed about the Creator, the Christ, the Spirit. But after many conversations of theologians and bishops and the king, they said, we need some agreement. We need everybody to believe the same thing about God, so let's focus on substance. What is the substance of God? And they agreed through these councils that they had and through these conversations that God as a substance was pure, and the three persons of the Trinity shared the exact same substance. And that's all good. I don't have any problem with that. I believe that. But what was missing was they rarely, if ever, talked about the relationship between the three. And that's what Richard Rohr does in his book, and that's what this image that you have in front of you is all about. There's a relationship between the three persons of the Trinity and us. So when I think of the Trinity, what comes to my mind is pure love. The three persons, there's no doubt they love each other completely and accept each other completely. Pure trust, 100% trust, vulnerability, and intimacy. And God invites me, go figure, into that. God invites you into that, and God invites all of us together to live like that. As I was thinking about the coming of Jesus, the coming of Christ at Christmas, and what it meant 2,000 years ago, I think that's what it means. There's this intimacy, this vulnerability, this trust, this pure love that God is, and God invites us to be a part of that and to share that with others, because whether we realize it or not, that's what God is, and that's who we are. It's just that some of us realize it. Some of us practice that. And it's okay if other people don't. That doesn't change anything. But most importantly for me, when I look at another person, whether it's somebody in this church or somebody at another church or somebody just out in the community that never goes to church, I want to see that in them. I want to see that same pure love and vulnerability and trust and intimacy that God sees in them. And whenever I don't see that, rather than saying what's wrong with them, or here's why I don't trust them, or here's why I may not love them as much, I can look at myself and ask, what's going on inside me? What is it that I don't realize or that I'm resisting that keeps me from seeing that divine image in other people? Well, the day before Polani's first day, actually, as a junior in high school, he came to live with me. And I didn't really have much warning. I think the day before I knew, Polani's going to come live with me, and school starts the day after he arrives. Talk about preparation. I was blown away. I had just moved back to the San Francisco Peninsula, but I wasn't in the same school district in San Mateo County as I was when I lived in Palo Alto, and I just thought, I have no idea what school he's even supposed to go to. I don't know what kind of paperwork I need to fill out. I don't know what kind of documents he needs to bring with him so that we can take that actually to the school district office to get him registered. I don't know what kind of classes. I didn't know anything. In fact, I remember walking into the school district office once, and I just walked up to this poor lady sitting behind the desk, and I said, I have a confession to make. My son's coming to live with me tomorrow. Or actually, he's arriving sometime today. School starts tomorrow, and I just want you to know I don't know anything, so treat me like that. And she just had a great time telling me all these things I needed to know as I wrote them down, and she wrote down a lot of things for me. But I'll tell you, when Polani came to live with me full time and I was a single parent, whoa, I had to prepare in a brand new way altogether. And I tell you, I actually enjoyed it. It was a little nerve-wracking because I thought, well, I need to get him started at school the day he, is supposed to start school. But there were so many other things. And I thought, I'm going to do my very, very best right now to prepare for Polani's coming. But I know I can't do it all today. And after he gets, I'm going to keep preparing new ways to welcome him and get him ready for whatever it happens to be that he needs to do. And I really think that that is the message of Advent for all of us. Because you know what? Sometimes God, Jesus, shows up to us in a completely unexpected way that might even change our lives dramatically. And the question we really ought to be asking ourselves is, are we ready? And if not, how we might prepare for that, not just today, but even after he arrives. As we now prepare our hearts for Holy Communion, I want you to spend just a moment in silence considering what it would mean to you that Jesus, that God comes to you today with pure love, complete trust, utter vulnerability, and intimacy, and asks you to have that for others, for all others. What might you do to prepare yourself for that? I know somebody's going to get the children as we begin communion in just a moment, but as the children are coming, let's just have a moment of silence as we sit with that. Holy God, prepare our hearts, our minds, our very lives for whatever way it is that you choose to come to us today and at Christmas and every day and every moment. Amen.